Hello YouTube, this is Todd Martin and I'm back with another video. And in this video I'm going to be talking a little bit about basically how the internet works. In a very basic way. I'm not going to get into too broad of an aspect, but just kind of really explain some things, especially with like domain names. And that's actually where I'm going to start. What is a domain name? Right, we've all seen domains. Google.com, probably one of the more famous ones, or the famous one, since it does have the #1 Alexa traffic rate ranking in the world. Google.com, or as everybody uses as an example, example.com, which you need to find out if somebody actually owns that, because that's been used tons of times in instructional videos and instructional documents. So essentially, what is a domain name? Believe it or not, a domain name is nothing but an IP address. A domain name represents an IP address. So, as an example, we will say Google. Google represents an IP address. So whenever you type google.com, you are really calling an IP address. And we are going to use as an example of the IP address 127.0.0.0. Somewhere in the world, there is a place where google.com is the IP address is 127.0.0.0, but that's on the actual server that has Google on it. So we're just going to say hypothetically google.com is 127.0.0.0. So whenever you type into your URL bar, which is the Uniform Resource Locator, you're actually saying, okay, I want you to give me this domain. Now, how does essentially internet work with connections and everything? The internet is a lot like a phone. Actually, the fact, if you've ever installed your own network, or if you ever installed your own home internet, you would notice that you start off with a telephone line or a telephone jack. And then you get a filter, which usually is a splitter. Most people use a telephone and modem splitter or a filter, depending on how exactly you want to call it. It splits it and filters it. So you plug that into the telephone jack, and then you plug in your telephone line if you need it, or you plug in what's called either a T1, or there's a bunch of names I've heard it called. T1 probably isn't exactly the exact term, because for instance, Cat5, Cat5e, these cables essentially do the same. The difference in the name is that it's a different cable which offers a different amount of speed, kind of like the difference between USB 1.0, USB 2.0, and USB 3.0 is the amount of speed that it can transfer in a set amount of time, which is usually measured in megabytes, kilobytes, or gigabytes per second. So you take that T1 or Ethernet cable or Cat5 or Cat5e cable, whatever you want to call it, or if you just want to call it the internet cable, that's fine. You plug it in from the modem slot on your filter or splitter, and then you plug it into the back of your router. Now, well, not router, your modem. And what your modem does is your modem is kind of like a translator. A modem is able to take packets that you send and put them in a format that can travel along this line, and take packets that it can receive and send it back to you. And there's also a little bit more complex things that it goes into. For instance, it assigns every computer connected to the network a IP address, and that's how it knows to route traffic to each computer, is because if computer 1 that has the IP address of 1.1.1.1 sends a packet of information, it sends it, and then whenever it comes back, it knows to send it to computer 1 at the IP address of 1.1.1. Then you also have your router. Your router is usually more whenever you get into wireless internet. You then plug in from the modem to the router with usually a T1 cable or an Ethernet cable, Cat5 cable, Cat5e, whatever you want to call it. I generally usually call it a T1 or an Ethernet cable just because it sounds old school, and it kind of flips people out whenever you say a T1 cable, because then they have no clue what you're talking about. So router, very simply, Usually routers are wireless routers. Now more and more we're starting to see combos. For instance, I have AT&T Uverse, and it's actually a combination of a router and a modem in one, instead of having to have two separate boxes like we used to have. Anything else I should talk about? Okay, so whenever you send a traffic, whenever you send a packet, my bad, I showed you guys this little tool before on the YouTube channel. If you haven't seen it, you might want to go check it out. But it's called a Traceroute. Actually, on Mac, I completely forgot. It's Traceroute, not TraceRT, not TracerRT. Alright, as you can see, I'm doing a traceroute to google.com, and what this is going to do is this is going to show basically every server that a packet has to go between me and the server for google.com. And as you can see, we go to the home portal, which this is my local area IP address for the router. The router itself, or modem itself, actually has an IP address, which is 192.168.1.125. Usually they'll be on a 192.168, or most of them are on a 192.168 scheme, but there are some that are on like a 10.0 scheme or something like that. So what happens is we send the packet, and the first place it goes is to my ISP. My ISP, ISP stands for Internet Service Provider. So send the packet to the Internet Service Provider. Dial it in, basically call it, because that's what we're doing, because the internet works a lot like a phone. Whenever you're trying to send a message from one place to another, you're basically calling that IP address, you're calling that server and making a quick connection. So we're calling from our ISP to this server, who knows the pathway to google.com, and then it's going to call up this server, then it's going to call up this server, and ultimately it does get to Google. So there's just a very, very rough explanation of how the internet works, very simplistic matter. Another way to explain this, to explain how we have things bounce around in the internet, why it's having a call from one IP address to another. If you know anything about radios and cell phone communication, as you know, in your area you have a cell phone tower. Now, I live in North Carolina. If I call someone in California, I'm going to call from my phone to my local cell phone tower. That's going to route that's going to connect me to another cell phone tower. That's going to connect me to another cell phone tower, which will connect me to a couple hundred cell phone towers until I get to that cell phone tower of where my friend is that I'm calling in California. So think about it that way. The internet works exactly the same. It's just the data format's a little bit different, but it all goes in and out the same cable. So that's a very brief explanation of networking and how the internet works.